So you've been doing this job for a long time. You've seen a lot of students. After a certain point, I assume you kind of see like in a video game, like archetypes and types of students, types of maybe not even types of students, but types of issues and types of situations that you come upon year after year after year, and you have to give advice upon. I'm thinking of like some typical high school profiles, maybe some cases. And so I'm going to present one of these, and tell me first if I'm right in that this is an issue, and then what kind of advice you would give, or what kind of situations, and maybe you might dip into that bag of stories to show how these students maybe address that problem, and then, or not even a problem, but address situation and how they went to college. So maybe the first one might be what we would maybe call a traditional splitter, where their GPA is not that great. Maybe they had a rough start to their high school career, but they worked hard. They have a good standardized test score. They're going to college. That GPA is going to be an issue. They can't bring it back up. Just not enough time. Just numbers don't work out. But they're serious about going to college. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean that. I think if you had to have a split, that would be the worst split than the other way. But I've seen kids who obviously are smart enough to score well, and then they can express themselves well enough on an essay, and maybe they have a reasonable explanation for their poor performance up until that point, or some profound thing that they could talk about. I've seen it work out. I think the first thing that comes to mind, when I previewed your question before, was a kid who had all sorts of issues. I mean, I was just like praying most of the time that he would survive, like live to graduate from high school. He ended up, but his SAT score, he's a like white kid, so he never went to Hagwon, but he got like 15 something, whatever. Or at that time was it 20? No, it was like 15 something. And so obviously a smart kid. You have a conversation with him, like he's brilliant. Like he just knew things. So I knew he was brilliant. So I tried to express that he is brilliant. He just his transcript just doesn't show it, because he just won't do homework. He will not study. He doesn't care. So it's like 2 point whatever it was. But he ended up getting into a top liberal arts college, and they took a chance on him. I don't think he graduated, but they took a chance on him. So we have something like that. We've had just even more recently, certain schools that seem to be willing to take chances on kids like that, where they haven't shown the discipline in high school, but they want to give them a shot. So there are certain schools that have that sort of a reputation.
And you express maybe your newfound maturity, or your maturity through essays and through letters.
Yeah, yeah. And the more recent kids, they were both brilliant writers. I mean, so they were obviously smart enough in every other way. It's just school was not their thing.
They really showed that they could excel maybe in a different setting, different situation.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out that way usually. I mean, they really have to aim much lower and just kind of but as long as they graduate from high school anywhere in any international school here in Korea, they'll get into university.
And maybe think about transferring after.
Yeah. Or, I mean, it doesn't actually matter. Even if it's an accredited school, it's a good school.
Yeah.
Because if you can be the top of the class there, you'll probably go to Harvard Law if you want to.
Yeah.
I've realized this after doing grad school admission. It's like you have to do well in college.
Well, wherever you end up.
Yeah, wherever you end up.
You don't have to end up at the top university.
Yeah, no. And if you go to a top school and you have a 2.7 GPA, good luck going into anything further.
Yeah.
I mean, getting a job is a problem. Going to graduate school, forget about it.
Yeah.
I mean, top graduate school.
Right. Well, so it's more question of, we're coming to the conversation of fit again, really. And now I'm kind of blanking because we did a little circle in the dirt.
Well, I was going to talk about the
opposite.
way.
Right.
The reverse splitter.
Yeah.
High GPA,
Yeah.
test scores didn't come out as I wanted to. Maybe they are to like 5, 6
Yeah.
test attempts.
Right. And that was really, for the kids like that, it was really a blessing in disguise, the whole COVID situation where tests were optional. And so if they had high GPA, but they just can't score on, there's some like that. There aren't very many like that, but there are some like that. And unfortunately for those kids, they really suffered through, because they feel like, okay, I don't quite measure up, so I can't apply to those schools. Well, during COVID, they didn't have to do it. And I know parents were always worried about at that point, and even now, right? Even though they say they're test optional, what does that mean? Like, are they really test optional? Are they really not looking at it if you don't turn it in? No, they don't look at it if they don't turn it in. So if you look at, if they accepted 1,000 kids and say, okay, overall, how many kids applied test optional? If they say 30%, 40%, that's normal. And you look at if they accepted 1,000 kids and you ask them how many of those kids were test optional, they didn't submit a test score, 30, 40%. So it's proportional, which means they really are not looking at it. So why they had to start bringing it back, I have no idea. Anyway.
So, I mean, for those students, maybe you look at test optional schools.
Yeah, that's what we do, right? And and the ones that, if they're test optional, just say don't submit it. And I don't think it hurts them.
Here's a more interesting case. Student, their transcript looks good mix of A's and B's. They're not the top 5% of their class, but they did okay for themselves. But you look at kind of the rest of the student, and there's not all too much going on with them. They're not a huge
We call them the
direction.
vanilla student. It's like they're a good kid. They're not causing trouble in school. Maybe they did like one or two like volunteer organization stuff. Nothing kind of off the chart. Nothing really interesting or very specific to them. They're not a bad student.
Yep.
They're not excelling at anything. They're not super passionate about anything. They're kind of vanilla, and they have to find a fit for them somewhere. What do they do? How do they do that?
My favorite flavor is vanilla, so
Great, all yours.
no, those are hard. And I guess those are the ones with no momentum that I talked about
Yeah.
before, where it's like, okay, they're not stupid. Obviously, they are capable. They're fully capable of doing, but they're just not motivated to do anything. Well, you just have to kind of suffer through whatever it is that they have and present their, what they have the best they can. But they have to be selective about the schools that they're going for. And so, I think, there are plenty of those kinds of kids that do, but I think they don't. If you have a wise counselor that will, hopefully control their list so that they're not reaching for everything, but they reach for a few, and then for the most part, they go for the schools that are about right for them.
And your counselor probably knows the best, given that they've had those years of experience there.
You would hope.
They have frames of reference, at least. I think that's the hardest thing for
Yeah.
high schoolers.
This conversation is really making me remember that you need to keep track of your GPA early on. Like, you really can't fiddle with those numbers. And when I was in, especially also when I was in college, it's like you would sit and do the math to see, like, you submit an assignment or take an exam and see like how lower your grade will go depending on how awful this one exam
You make the
goes.
spreadsheet.
Yeah, you put in the calculators. There are weighted calculators online. You do it, but you always notice that it's way harder to bring something up like 1% versus going down like 10 or 12.
Yeah.
So
Unless you're getting a 0.3 GPA, then it's a lot easier.
then
to
it's
bring
a
it up.
lot easier to go up. And
Bell curve.
every push is a strong push up if you're that low. So it's if you're it's just in good, keep stay in good terms with yourself
Yeah.
and your counselor and your school. Just you don't have to push yourself to the point where you're going to break, but take care of your GPA. It's not coming back after a while.
There's a fun thing at Brown where we only have A, B, C, D, no plus minuses, so it's very hard cutoffs. And also, they don't calculate a GPA. They don't believe in a GPA. That's what they say. That's their whole pedagogic thing, their whole educational ideal thing. Grad schools care.
Yeah, they care a lot.
So I had to figure that stuff out on my own. I was in COVID. I remember I was in my room because we were back home, and I was like, wait a second. There is a number. They're just not going to tell me, and they're never going to tell me. So I have to figure it out myself. Made the spreadsheet, et cetera, et cetera. Keep an eye on it.
Yep.
Stay on top of B's at least. So give you something to work on.
Yeah, but I also say that, the one thing that sticks with you until the day you retire, if you're looking for jobs, like you're putting your application into your employer, they always ask for your undergrad. I'm like, when's the last time? I graduated like almost 40 years ago. They still want my GPA from my undergrad. No one asks for my high school, though.
Something that you might have a little more specialty with, you were a coach, the athlete. Do you think they approach the college application a little differently?
I mean, if they're a recruited athlete, it's totally different.
Completely different story.
Completely different. Yeah. And so if you're recruited, then really your numbers are not that as important. You just have to be within the bucket of the school. So if you're looking at a top school, then you have to be a top student, but you don't have to be top. So you can be
You got to be the bottom of the bucket
yeah, you
of the
could be
top.
yeah, as long as you're in the bucket
Somewhere.
right? If you're out of the bucket, then no matter how good you are at the sport, for those schools, they will not accept you because ultimately it's the admissions office that makes the final decision on it. Now, if you're D1 athlete, which in Korea there are just not very many of them, and you're going for Stanford or Duke, then even if you have a 2.3, chances are if you're a superstar like basketball player because you're 6'9" and you can do a 360 dunk, yeah, you'll probably get in. But if you want that, if you want to go to Princeton, no, it's not going to happen.
Now,
Even
what about student athlete emphasis student?
yeah. So let's say D3s and Ivy League D1 types of schools where they are looking at student first, at least up to a certain level, and then you have to be an athlete that the coach wants. And if they are and they're being recruited, then it's a totally different, right? So you get you can do a pre-read, you can do get your application done, and they can already pre-approve of your admission before you actually apply, and then you get the letter real quick, and then you're in. Very few kids experience that, and unfortunately, there are I don't know. Unfortunate. But I know kids who have done that, who I know that, we've had some in the past at SFS where, if they're recruited athletes, that they're thought of as less or lesser because they didn't deserve getting into a specific school. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you knew the amount of work that they had to do in order to get recruited, you would not say that. That's just a slap in their face, like all the work and all the dedication they had to put into in order to get to that level so that the coach would want. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of the kids I work with are somewhere right in between, right? Are they really wanted by coaches? Maybe certain ones, maybe some of the lower ones, but the top schools are competitive in most sports, unfortunately. And probably because all the smart kids who are athletes want to go there, and how many smart kids are also great athletes, right? So and bring them all together, and we have a few schools that they all go for. And so it is competitive still. But I think for those kinds of kids, I think it's a fine line. Like, so I always have to ask them, like, okay, do you want to go to a slightly less, prestigious school to play the sport if you have a chance? Or you get into a more prestigious school, but you can't play. Which would you rather choose? And this is where I separate an athlete from a student, right? And usually they're pretty clear, yes, this or that. If it's this, then there's a lot of work. Like, you email everybody.
A lot of cold emailing.
100, I usually recommend 100.
Yeah.
100 coaches, 100 schools, just,
So this is for a student who wants to play.
yeah, wants to play. And then if they don't, then you kind of do a little bit of both. So let's say, let's see if you could get an offer, and then maybe that'll change your mind in terms of, like, do you really want to play or not, right? And then apply to the schools that they want because, they like the school for its academics. So
Do you have any thoughts on art students?
art students, I mean, I think there are I guess, I don't know what the actual proportion would be, but I would say more than half the kids these days seem to be going away from just the pure art design schools. They're going for more universities with those kinds of programs in it, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get into, even if they're good art students, because there are certain schools that look at the type of GPA and SAT scores that you have before they consider your portfolio. If you go to a pure art design school, they're looking at your portfolio 100%, pretty much 95%, and that's it. And if, as long as you pass your classes, then chances are, if your art is good enough, then you get in. So there's not much to talk about that other than, their portfolio, that's where they spend most of their time. I know they go crazy over it to meet the requirements of every school, which every school is a little bit different depending on what it is that they're trying to major in. And then universities are, they're not easy.
So you got to be a good student first before you're a good artist to be considered even for your
So
portfolio.
certain programs like let's say Ivy League Fine Arts, BFAs. Those are unless you got to be in the bucket, but you can't just be at the bottom of the bucket. You got to be just in like smack in the middle of the bucket,
You gotta be
bucket of the
swimming.
top. Yeah. So you got to be that kind of a student and then be an amazing artist. Like that's really, really hard.
That's
I
a
haven't
tall
had,
order.
Yeah, I haven't had very many get in. I had one get in a couple of years ago, but it's probably it in my whole career. And then there are schools like University of Michigan and Carnegie Mellon where if you're into design, it's like they see a little bit of both. So I've seen slightly weaker kids get into those kinds of programs based upon their portfolio and vice versa. And then you have the pure art design schools that they just look at portfolio and nothing else.
So I was gonna ask about like those top exceptional students, but they're gonna be fine. They kind of know what they're doing. I want to ask about maybe kind of the what they should avoid, the pitfalls you see about students who are in maybe that top 5% who are aiming for highest colleges. What do you see as their downfalls?
Like, what are mistakes they can make?
Have made.
In terms of creating a list,
Lists, like applications, writing essays, getting recommendations, any part of that process.
yeah, I don't know if I can actually distinguish between the top students and sort of top students. I mean, I think they're all deserving. Like, I mean, I'd say 60-70% of all the kids I've ever worked with at SFS, YES, or Singapore American, you drop them off at any Ivy League school, they'll do just fine. So are they deserving of it? That's a subjective word. I don't know, right? Yes, I'll say yes. They can handle it. They're more than smart enough. Unfortunately, it's just only top 5% of the best students in the entire world get in. So, and then of course, among that, there are some athletes who are not the top 5%, but they get in, and then legacy kids and stuff. So it really is less than 5%, right? So I guess I don't know if there's a difference. I think the biggest issue I have is just they overreach because they all want the same schools. And the problem is that some of them, they don't belong there. I think schools like Brown, for example, right? I'll say that there are many kids who just wouldn't belong there. Not because they're not smart enough, but because it's the wrong culture. I don't think, it's pretty liberal. It's...
Right, it's an issue of fit again.
Yeah. And it's just the wrong place. Yet it's got the name, so they want it. Right, and there's certain kids who just say, okay, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, that's it. That's all I have. No, I don't.
You can be the top one in the world, and that's not enough.
Or like, I can't see you on that campus.
No, yeah. There's certain kids who say, MIT, I'm so excited about MIT. Like, really? No, I mean, no knock on MIT. There's plenty of good things that are happening, obviously, for the right reasons. But there's certain kids who just don't belong there yet. That's what they go for, and those are the mistakes. And then if they come in with a list of 10 reaches, like straight out reaches, there's a problem, and there's a psychological damage that comes from the denial letters, rejection letters that they get. I don't know if you've experienced any of them. If the first one is
We had very privileged cycles.
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't have to read a lot of those, but
yeah. The first one hurts. Second one is like, you're down and somebody
they
punches
just keep
you.
going.
Yeah.
They just keep going.
And then if you have like 10 of them, 11 of them, can you imagine what kind of, like, you have nothing left. Oh, how are you going to go to college now? I'm a loser. I only got into this school, so I'm going to go and it's not good.
And that's where the social emotional counseling of your education comes into play.
Yeah. Now, as an independent consultant, it's a little different. I feel like maybe I can be a little bit more aggressive because, we need to get results. But it's not the best thing.
So the smart kids, the smart thing to do is keep an open mind. Not look at just the top schools at the top part of the U.S. News ranking, but really look for places that might work for who you are, like what you want to do, places you can live for 4 years, like we've talked about before, to have those considerations and be open to altering your list as you talk to your counselor.